Live stream. This is the special meeting of Council to adopt the 2021 annual budget. And as a special meeting, this is the only topic, as you would understand, for this particular meeting. So in opening proceedings, I would like to acknowledge the Darumbal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and honour their elders past, present and emerging. So councillors, you've been provided with the budget documentation and the reports therefore. And the first item on the agenda is 11.1, and I'll pass over to the Chief Financial Officer, Andrea Ellis, for discussion around the Operational Plan 2020-21.
Thank you, Mayor. The Operational Plan is one of our key strategic documents which is developed as part of the annual budget process. The Operational Plan captures the key projects and priorities to be actioned based on the outcomes identified in the Corporate Plan 2030. The intent of the Operational Plan 2021 would be to set the one-year direction for Council and articulates Council's the area of responsibility, addresses Council's risks and monitors the overall performance of Council. The 2021 Operational Plan was prepared in response to achieving the outcomes of the Corporate Plan 2030 and identifies what activities will be undertaken over the next 12 months, how these activities align with the Corporate Plan 2030 outcomes and deliverables, and how the progress of each of the activities is to be measured against the target outcome. There are a total of 118 actions across the 5 themes identified in our Corporate Plan. Were there any particular questions on the Operational Plan, councillors?
All right. Thank you, Madam CFO. Councillors, we will go to the debate phase of this particular report, so I'll call for a mover and a seconder, and then we'll go into debate. Mover, Councillor Hutton. Seconder, please, Councillor Eastwood. All right, thank you. Councillor Hutton, would you like to speak to the report?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. And can I commend the 2021 Operational Plan to the Council? This plan outlines the KPIs upon which the organisation and councillors will be holding each other to account for. It's no tick-in-the-box exercise, but rather a strategic link back to the Livingston 2050 Community Plan vision and the integrated 10-year corporate plan of our council. I offer my thanks and support to the officers for the work that they've undertaken to set realistic yet aspirational goals. It's also worthy to note, and I know the CFO mentioned that this year's operational plan actually has more KPIs than 2018 or 2019, reflecting the desire of the council and of the organisation to be held to account for a progress along the roadmap to the 2050 aspirations of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Is anyone speaking against the recommendation? No? Okay. Councillor Easton, would you like to speak for it?
Just briefly, Mr. Mayor. Look, yes, it's a good corporate plan. It sets our year's direction and also the direction for the future years of Council. It articulates Council's deliverables, responsibilities, and addresses Council's risks and performance. I think it's a really good corporate plan, and just want to thank the CFO.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. Would any other councillor like to speak in relation to the recommendation?
Yeah, just very briefly, I just think it's encouraging to be reminded that this operational plan ensures that there'll be no loss of levels of service whatsoever to our community. So the things that our community value and believe are important, and ultimately what it makes it so great to live here in the community of Livingston, whether you be on the Capricorn Coast or the hinterlands of Coral and all the way up to Sewage Bay, it's those levels of service that this council provides through this budget is going to continue on, and that should be commended and something that we should be very proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. Would anyone else like to speak for the motion? All right, councillors, we have a mover and a second. A mover in Councillor Hutton, a seconder in Councillor Eastwood. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. Moving on to 11.2, the revenue policy. Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. The revenue policy sets out the principles used by Council in making and levying rates and charges, exercising its power to grant rebates and concessions for rates and charges, recovery of unpaid rates and charges, and cost recovery principles. The policy has been prepared in accordance with the requirements under the Local Government Act and Local Government Regulation. In preparing this policy, Council has considered the better practice guidelines produced by the Department of Local Government Racing and Multicultural Affairs, being the Guideline on Equity and Fairness in Rating in Queensland Local Government, as well as the QAO Performance Report number 17 in 2017-18 on managing local government rates and charges. This guideline is intended to promote best practice and identifies the following principles, being equity for like properties, user pays, meaningful contribution, predictability and fairness in the preparation of this report.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Councillors, are there any questions before we go to debate on this? Okay, may I have a mover and a seconder for this report, please? Councillor Bello, thank you very much. Councillor Hutton, seconding. Thank you. Councillor Bello, would you like to speak to the report?
Oh, no, not at this point. Thank you.
Councillor Hutton.
Yes, just briefly, Mr. Mayor. I endorse the revenue policy as presented to Council. This important document seeks to set out the principles that we as a Council adopt on behalf of the community in using to inform the budget that we've collectively put together today. So Livingston aspires to have a fair and equitable rating system while ensuring flexibility in how we can raise revenue for our community. Quoting directly from the policy, this policy sets out the principles used by Council in the making and levying of rates and charges, exercising its power to grant rebates and concessions for rates and charges, recovery of unpaid amounts of rates and charges, and cost recovery principles. I strongly endorse this policy and the principles which I believe that we as a community aspire for, which is equity for like properties, which is user pays, meaningful contributions, predictability for ratepayers, and fairness.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone else like, is anyone speaking against the recommendation? I beg your pardon. Okay, would anyone else like to speak in support of the recommendation? Okay, councillors, so we've got a mover in Councillor Bello and a seconder in Councillor Hutton. All in favour, please. Thank you, councillors, that's unanimous. 11.3, councillors, is the revenue statement, and as we know, this is the document that sets out our differential rating categories, our water, sewage, and our waste charges, etc. So, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor explained, the revenue statement is considered to be the explanatory document that supports and illustrates or captures how the principles identified in the revenue policy will take effect for the next 12 months. The revenue statement is a statutory requirement, and in order for the budget to take effect, it must be adopted. Councils will also note in the agenda for this report there is also a number of resolutions that are separate to each other that will also form part of this revenue statement, and each of those resolutions must still be undertaken today in order for the entire budget process to be in effect. So the revenue statement does include the rates and charges that will be levied for the coming financial year, the differential general rating categories which will be levied, a description of each of the rating categories, the special rates and charges that will be applied, the concessions that will be granted for rates and charges, the criteria stipulated for cost recovery fees, and criteria used to determine charges for business activities. Council's long-term financial forecast assumes annual rate increases in line with CPI over the life of the forecast. Natural growth in assessments are estimated to be at 1% over the term of the plan. Any changes in future rate increases or natural growth estimates will impact the amount of rates and revenue generated and will also influence Council's long-term financial forecast unless there are corresponding reductions or cost increases in other revenue sources.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Any questions from the floor of the CFO? Okay, so councillors, may I have a mover and a seconder for this report, please? Councillor Mather moving, Councillor Eastwood seconding. Councillor Mather, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, members, I've sat through many budgets through this and the Rockhampton Regional Council. And many of those budgets I have never supported because I didn't believe there was fairness and equity. I believe the debt was spiralling. I believe we were living beyond our means. I just couldn't support it. About 2 years ago, I put in a request under a notice of motion for a revenue credit review. And it seemed to be at that time the Mayor put out a mayoral minute calling for restraint. But it was a little bit too late at that time because expenditure had been committed. Under this council, we will be relentless in scrutinising everything that happens. If you think it's been tough so far, it's been tough for the financial people who are getting mixed messages from us, a council, as to what we want and what we need, what we can afford. And I thank Andrea and her financial staff for putting us through the hoops very thoroughly over many, many weeks to make sure that we understand what we are dealing with. And I'm happy to support Andrea and her team today for the first time in a long time. I also thank the staff in the departments who are behind the scenes, who are having it tough because of our scrutiny. I make no apologies for that. And we will be back and we'll be unrelenting. We just want honesty so that we all know where we're going, in the same boat, in the same direction for the same reasons. I think I'll leave it for now and I'll come back with more later. But I'm just saying that it is a pleasure to be able to support a budget that I know is on the right track. I know it's being led by the right people, and I know the integrity of these councillors will actually provide the courage that we need to move on into the future with constraint, with discipline. We can and we will do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Councillor Eastwood, would you like to speak to the report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I guess this is the one that we actually deliberated upon the most, going back and forward, looking at different models, and I'm pleased to say that I think we've got it right, or as right as we possibly could. And, we're in the same place last year, and it was a very different story. So I'm really pleased to see that we've moved forward. We've got rid of the landlord tax. We've made rates as fair and equitable as we can. And we've done a good job. And we should give ourselves a bit of a clap on the back for this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. Would anyone else like to speak? Sorry, I'll go to anyone voting against the report first of all, please. Councillor Hutton.
Councillors, as will be clear from some of the other motions, that in any given year we become aware of issues that require attention. We collectively and individually have learnt that there are some inequities based on the principles outlined in our revenue policy that exist. I believe that the user pays and the fairness deficiencies exist with our water charging and our waste charges. And while I respect and agree that we must provide predictability for ratepayers, I cannot support the continuation of nor the exacerbation of these deficiencies. In concluding, I acknowledge the intention to work on addressing each of these concerns as soon as we do start the 2021 budget. However, at a personal level, I was concerned that I don't believe we can support the further perpetuation of these deficiencies.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone like to speak for the motion? Thank you. Councillor Friend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all,
Councillor Eastwood, can you turn your microphone off?
I would just like to thank all of the staff, for the finance team, for the staff in the background who have worked so hard to help us councillors undertake this budget. I'm very proud of this budget. Throughout campaign, throughout speaking with the community, we learned that people were really hurting in their hip pocket. We knew that we couldn't reduce the rates for them, but we have minimalised the rise in the rates. We've tried our very, very hardest to help all ratepayers and help our community, because after all, we are also part of the community and ratepayers. So we have done a wonderful job on this budget, and I'd just like to commend this to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Anyone else like to speak to the report, please? Councillor Bello.
Yeah, if I could, thank you, Mr. Chair. Turn that back on, councillors. I guess picking up on Councillor Hutton's point in relation to the full cost recovery of the water, I believe, that it relates to, and I think it's a very valid point that is not lost on, certainly on me individually, and no doubt all of the councillors. And picking up on Councillor Mather's point, I think next year will be, I don't think it'll be any easier, because there will be some harder decisions that we need to implement or decide on to implement. How are we going to address some of those disparities in the costing of providing water across the various schemes that we do? It would be fair to say that it's not sustainable in the long run, or not equitable to do in the long run. And I think most importantly, we acknowledge that, we recognise it, and this is about a process, I guess, over the 4-year terms that this council's in place, that we'll be addressing by order of priority when the need is to intervene and say, okay, now we need to change. So that's the steps that we've started, and I guess an important step that we've taken here with this budget in relation to the non-principal owner place of residence is that this table believes that it's not the best way to categorise those properties. We want to see investors come to our region. We want to welcome them to our region. We want to do everything we can to make Livingston and the Capricorn Coast one of the best places to invest. And we believe that we do that by not taxing more. The Commonwealth Government already tax people who have investment properties based on their income. From the local government's perspective, we want to do what we can to encourage people to come here. We want to be the council that's known that doesn't have an increased tax on their investment properties. We want those investors to make good returns when they come to this region and see it as a viable alternative to perhaps the southeast corner. So we welcome those investors here, and on those grounds I support this resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. Would anyone else like to speak to the report?
May I sum up, Mr. Mayor?
You certainly may sum up, Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to comment on comments made by our fellow councillors. The cost of water. Yes, we will be actually looking at a new scheme, new prices to be able to provide the water. I'd go one step further in saying we need to put a great investment into our infrastructure because it's not up to scratch in many aspects. The provision of funding to restore and maintain our infrastructure hasn't been there. And our managers, I believe, have been at fault because they have not taken this up and stayed with it all the time. And that's what worries me. Because we've got a lot of catching up to do. Not only the price of water, but the pipes and the reservoirs. They're leaking. We've got to fix it. So I spent my weekend taking pictures of leaking reservoir. And we've got a lot of work to do. The landlord tax is the big winner, Mr. Mayor. The people who have invested in this shire, whether they live in their house or whether they don't, they are the winners. It's taken us a couple of years to get rid of it. It came with some pain, but we've done it. And let us be the example to all other councils throughout the state who have to rely on the landlord tax to plug up their budget. We haven't done it. We've done it honestly and transparently. And that makes me feel really good.
Councillor Mather, can I just make a comment or a response in reply to one of your comments? I don't necessarily lay the blame for our infrastructure situation, not that it's critical by any stretch of the imagination. I don't lay that blame at the feet of the officers in totality. I think officers can only do what they can do with the money that they're allocated. And we all know that money is tight, and we all know that the allocations for particular programs possibly in the past haven't been what those officers have required or requested. But at the end of the day, they can only do what they can do with what they're actually allocated. So I don't know that it's necessarily fair to lay that responsibility totally with the managers.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate your comments. Our officers need to be forceful if they need more money to keep our infrastructure in good shape. They need to be more forceful. And I know it has been difficult in the past, but at the moment, I would hope that we have officers that will demand the attention that those infrastructures do need as far as funding goes.
Well, I think
And I haven't seen it happen just yet.
Well, I think, Councillor, all that can be led from this particular table. So
Yes, thank you.
that would be, I think, the message that we'd give to the officers, that we would welcome that sort of input. Okay, councillors, we have a mover and a seconder for the revenue statement, and I'll just indicate at this point in time that towards the end of this particular meeting, before we adopt the final report, I will be making a comment around the budget in total from a mayor's perspective, and also inviting the councillors to provide summary comments as well at that particular point in time. So we have a mover and a seconder here, councillors. So those in favour of supporting the revenue statement, please. Thank you. Those against? Noted. Did you want your vote recorded, Councillor Hutton? Thank you. So Councillor Hutton wishes his vote to be recorded. Justine, against? So that brings us to 11.4, councillors, which is the differential general rate report. And I'll pass over to you, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. As I indicated with the revenue statement, the budget requires a number of separate resolutions for all of the components to take effect. This and the subsequent 8 recommendations after this particular one are reflective of that. All of the information contained within the differential rates information is also been included in the revenue statement. So we have 28 categories of differential rates for Livingston. Livingston is committed to spreading the burden of general rates equitably across all rateable properties in the Shire. We recognise that the use of a single general rate would not result in an equitable distribution of the rates burden amongst ratepayers. We recognise that certain land uses and locations of land require and or impose greater demands on council services relative to other land uses and locations. And we also acknowledge that valuation relativities between commercial, industrial, or lands used for tourist facilities, rural, island lands, urban, productive and residential uses do not reflect the intensity of the land use nor the actual or potential demands of council services and facilities. For the 2021 budget, an average 2% overall increase in rates and utilities revenue has been implemented, along with the removal of the non-owner occupied, or otherwise known as the non-principal place of residence rating categories. The increase of 2% is in line with the Consumer Price Index figure for March 2020 at 2%. The effect of the Department of Natural Resource, Mines and Energy recently issued valuations will apply from 1st of January 2020. This will mean that although council is only collecting 1.3% more in general rate revenue upon existing properties, the impact of individual ratepayers will be influenced by their respective change in valuation. It is noted that the average residential ratepayer will have an increase of around 1.69%, or equivalent to $70.36. The total revenue to be generated from our general rates for the 2021 financial year is estimated to be around $33.4 million, which does include a 1% growth assumption factor included to achieve that revenue level.
Thank you, Madam CFO. So for members of the community and the press gallery, just to summarise that for you, Council's proposed rate increase for the 2021 financial year is 2%, which is in line with the March quarter CPI index, and Council has committed to attempting not to raising rates beyond CPI for the following 10 years. But the CFO's point is one I'd like to highlight. Rates increases, or rates in general, are a function of two components. One is the cent in the dollar raised or rated by council, and the second component is the land valuation itself. Now, when there are increases in land valuations or decreases in land valuations, that has an effect or can have an effect on the rates imposed. Now, in this particular case, the 2% increase, as the CFO has pointed out, 0.7% of that 2% belongs to valuation changes. Is that correct, Madam CFO? So the real impact of council's rate increase here is about 1.3%. But overall, across the board for general rates and utilities charges, the increase will be 2%, as I said, which is in line with the Consumer Price Index for the March quarter. So, councillors, any questions of the CFO before we go into debate? Okay, may I have a mover and a seconder for this report, please? A mover, Councillor Friend, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Mather. Thank you, councillors. Okay, Councillor Friend, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, officers and fellow councillors. Equity, user pays, meaningful contribution, predictability and fairness. This is what this is all about. It really is encouraging to see the non-owner occupier removed for our residents, as that is equitable and it is transparent. And this is what our council, our new Livingstone Shire Council, is all about: equity and transparency and fairness. So I commend this to the table, and I'm happy to speak for this differential general rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Councillor Mather, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, Councillor Friend. Mr. Mayor, it's a juggling act, getting your rating systems right. If the structure is correct, it's fair, it's equitable, it's transparent, all of those things, then you've got to find the cent in the dollar. And while you're trying to tag your price onto a moving target, it becomes very difficult, because some of the valuations went up, some of the valuations went down. And we've got to find something in the middle that says fair and equitable. So we're on a moving target all the time, and it makes it very difficult. But our CFO and her team have done it very well, Mr. Mayor. I'm very happy with that. So I think it's as good as we're going to get at any time.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Is anyone wishing to speak against the report, the recommendation? Okay, so I'll open the floor to conversation. Councillors, anyone wish to speak to the report? Councillor Hutton?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. I generally endorse the differential general rates as outlined in the report for 2021. I do note the removal in 2021 financial year of the non-owner occupier rating category, and hope that this incentive draws greater investment from landlords and investors in property within the Shire, noting the incredibly low vacancy rental rates that we have here, and also the high yield that's been achieved in recent years, and hopefully that can be achieved.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone else like to speak to the report, please?
Just
All right,
briefly,
Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, it was a great win to get rid of the landlord tax or the non-owner occupier tax, and I just want to endorse Councillor Bellow's comments from earlier, in that we need to encourage investors into this area. And this is just one of the, I'll speak to the whole thing, but this is the main thing for me. We need to encourage investors to come here, to buy up, and to see the difference that we have, and that we actually encourage people to do that rather than discourage them by adding another tax, another rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. So, councillors, anyone else wish to speak to the report? Okay, so we'll go to the vote, noting for, again, the community and to the press that the rating categories now being adopted do not include the non-owner occupied category. So that has actually been dispensed with by council. All right, councillors, so we've got a mover in Councillor Friend, seconder in Councillor Mather. All those in favour, please. Thank you, councillors, that's unanimous. 11.5 on separate charges. Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. This report presents the separate charges for the 2021 financial year. Separate charges are levied equally on all rateable land in the Shire and include the road network separate charge, natural environment separate charge, and the disaster response separate charge. The road network separate charge covers part of the cost to defray. The road network separate charge is a levy set to defray part of the cost of maintaining the road network within the region. Council may can levy the charge equally on all rateable land within Livingstone Shire area. The amount of the road network separate charge for the 2021 financial year will be set at $571 per annum per rateable assessment throughout the region. Discount will not apply to this particular charge. The overall revenue generated from the road network separate charge is around $10.2 million. The natural environment separate charge seeks to defray part of the cost of formulating and implementing initiatives for the environmental protection, enhancement and conservation, including various waste management initiatives that contribute to these outcomes. This charge also applies equally on all rateable land within Livingstone Shire Council area. The natural environment separate charge will be increased by $1 to $66 per annum per rateable assessment throughout the region. Discount will not apply to the natural environment separate charge. Approximately $1.2 million is generated from this particular separate charge. The disaster response separate charge seeks to support council in the provision and ongoing maintenance of facilities for the state emergency services and provision of facilities and emergency equipment vital for the volunteers that assist our community. It also provides funding to provide mitigation strategies based on hazards and risks from disasters in the Livingstone Shire area, as well as to provide funding to recover from disaster events that impact our Shire. This separate charge has also increased by $1 to $26 per annum per rateable year. A discount does not apply to this charge. Just over $500,000 allocated in revenue is a provisional amount made for this separate charge.
Councillor Eastwood, could I get you to turn your microphone off, please? No worries. Thank you, Madam CFO. Are there any questions of the CFO before we go to debate on this report, councillors?
I am going to ask probably a rather ignorant question, but nevertheless, to Andrea, the quantum that we've allocated in this year's budget for the bushfire mitigation, just so I know when to speak to that, that's not within this section here, is it? Can you just verify where that sits?
Thank you, Councillor Bello. Part of the costs for those particular activities will be funded through the disaster response separate charge. The balance of those activities will be included in the overarching last report on the agenda today in the formulation of the budget and long-term financial plan.
Councillors, any other questions of the CFO? Okay, so may I have a mover and a seconder for the report, please? Councillor Mather, Councillor Hutton, thank you. Councillor Mather moving, Councillor Hutton seconding. Councillor Mather, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like separate charges because it's a clear demonstration of fairness and equity. When we need so much money for a certain project, whether it be roads, and I'll hinge on that one, if we divide what we want by the number of properties, everybody pays the same. If we were to go the other way, according to the valuation, everybody pays something different, and that's not fair. That's why separate charges are good. I'd just like to hinge on one item, and that's the roads, the rural road network. The annual fee coming in from each ratepayer, $571. That does not give us what we need to do our roads. We still rely on the general fund to supplement that. People may not know that. It really should be higher, but I would hesitate on making that higher at this point in time because they're hurting in the bush. They really only have their roads, and they're not in a very good state at the moment. The weather hasn't helped in the last couple of days. but there's a lot of injection that needs to go into our rural roads and certainly our urban ones. But the rural ones are falling behind as I've seen them over the years. They're falling behind. So I am mindful of $571 doesn't go very far for one property. But I just want people to realise that the general fund does supplement. And we need to have a real good look at how we do business. We've talked about maintaining roads for a long time, but we really haven't come up with the right strategy, the right money, and the right will to address it in the long term. And that's what we should be focusing on this term. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mather, and may I just provide a brief response as well. I guess I'm encouraged by this one. Not guess, I am encouraged by this budget in terms of what I see as a heightened allocation of funding towards rural roads in particular. Some of our long-standing issues are being addressed by this budget and also into the future. And as we're all aware, councillors, we've been through 13 budget sessions with the officers, and a big component of that has been the roads program through the capital works program. And look, nothing is ever perfect in terms of budgeting and satisfying community demand and aspirations. But certainly I think this budget starts us on the right path towards that recognition that we need to be allocating more funding and provide equal attention to the rural areas as has been in the coastal areas in the past. So, councillors, we have a mover and a seconder, and Councillor Mather and Councillor Hutton. Councillor Hutton, would you like to speak to the report?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. And I think that Councillor Mather is definitely on the right track when she says that separate charges do provide for ratepayers line of sight of where their money's going. And I think it is really important that they understand that when they provide this charge, it is inequality. Every rate notice across the Shire has these charges attached to it, and it's an equality matter that all are contributing to the cost of roads, contributing to the cost of the environment levying, the cost of the disaster responses that we have. Recognising that it is always going to be a balance, and that's the challenge, is that while we can provide line of sight saying that separate charges demonstrate inequality, it doesn't match the costs. We know that in any given year that we spend probably twice as much on roads as what the road levy collects, and so the general rates, which is not based on equality but rather on the equity principle that people who have land values that are substantially higher will contribute a greater amount because they've got the capacity to. So it's that balance between equality and equity that we see in separate charges, which I think speaks to the community. And the most important part is that education, that when they see their $500 odd going towards roads, that they don't think that that is all that council spends on roads, because literally that $10 million doesn't go anywhere near enough to the work that needs to be done in any given year, and that the general rates that are collected also on their rate notice provides for that, and that's where we have to get that balance right. And I commend this report because it recognises that we have both capacity to pay in the community through equity of general rates, but as well as an equality of having separate charges and providing line of sight for ratepayers.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Is anyone speaking against the report? Okay, so I'll open the floor to discussion now. Any councillor like to speak to the report? Councillor Friend, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The environmental levy is something very close to my heart, as I'm the portfolio holder for environment, waste, water, animal control, and many more. The environmental levy covers costs such as pests, pest control, vector, sustainability, the environment and waste management initiatives. Moving forward, within my next 4 years of tenure, I would like to show the community what we're actually spending that levy on, and how it can enhance our livability here in Livingston. We all love the beaches, we all love the parks, and we love our amenities. We have the second largest coastline for Livingstone Shire here in Queensland. And this is what this levy is going towards, to keep our beautiful Shire sustainable and to move forward with environmental initiatives. Hopefully within my next 4 years of tenure, we'll be able to show the community what their actual levy that they're paying for is going towards. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Any other councillor like to speak to the report? Okay, we have a mover in Councillor Mather, a seconder in Councillor Hutton. All in favour, councillors? Thank you. That's unanimous, Justine. Which brings us now, councillors, to 11.6. Madam CFO.
Special charges. So this report seeks to have council resolve the special charges that are already in existence. There are no new special charges being proposed for the 2021 financial year. So special rates and charges are levied by council to fund services or facilities that will especially benefit the owners of properties in a specific area. Revenue raised from these revenue streams will only be used to fund the implementation program for the specific services, facilities or activities as specified. The special charges are calculated on the estimated cost to council of providing the services. Special charges, as outlined within the recommendation, seek to defray the expenses it has incurred in providing identified services or facilities or engaging in identified activities because the land or its occupiers have especially benefited or will especially benefit from or will have special access to the identified services, facilities or activities, or the occupier of the land or the use made of the land especially contributes to the need for the service, facility or activity. Council has a number of special charges that are already in place that are wished to continue, these being the Rural Fire Services Levy, the Northwest Emu Park Sewage Benefited Area, the Causeway Township Sewage Benefited Area and the Molumban Sewage Benefited Area, and finally the Muskers Beach Revetment Wall. So as I mentioned previously, there are no new special charges being proposed for the 2021 financial year.
Thank you, Madam CFO, and for the benefit of the community watching in and the gallery. These special charges are only levied on the residents of the Shire, the ratepayers of the Shire, who are directly impacted by these particular schemes. So, for example, the Muskers Beach Revetment Wall applies only to residents or ratepayers at Muskers Beach. So it's not a charge applied universally across all ratepayers in the Shire. It is a special charge, as the name indicates, to the ratepayers of particular, taking advantage of particular schemes. So, councillors, are there any questions of the CFO? Okay, we'll move into debate. May I have a mover and a seconder for this report, please? Moved, Councillor Mather. Seconded. I'll second it. Justine. Okay. Councillor Mather, would you like to speak to the report?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, thank you. Special charges are applied on projects where they have no real other means of undertaking a project, like the revetment wall down at Muskers Beach. That was like a disaster like you've seen in New South Wales at the moment, with the houses potentially falling into the ocean. If the council didn't come to the aid there and assist, and it wasn't a gift, they're paying it back, that would never happen. So councils are able to do things like that. I'd just like to pay a tribute on this particular one, Mr Mayor, to the Rural Fire Brigades. They've had it tough, and when you look down the list to see what they charge their people in their locality, it's very minimal, because I understand everybody's hurting, but they also understand what they need to do on behalf of the constituents in their location to protect them. There's been a long-term discussion, debate, call it what you like, in relation to who provides the funding for the traffic control people when there's smoke about. You know, something so important that goes on and on and on. I hope we resolve that once and for all. But to these people, I think we need to all take our hat off to them, because they're out there at the moment burning roadsides in their own time, at their own expense, to protect their constituents. There is no boundary with a fire, as we all know. But these people are there, and when you see one fire brigade, you'll probably find 4 or 5 others out there helping them. I've seen it. it really gets to your heart, because these people, they come in, they're hot, they're sweaty, they're exhausted, and there are women there making scones and making sandwiches to keep them sustained. So in moving this motion, Mr Chairman, for special charges, I'd just like to recognise the amount of money that they actually levy the people in their locality is minimal compared with the price of the service that they provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. I'll waive my right to speak on this one, so we'll open it to the floor. Any councillor prepared to speak, wish to speak to the motion? All right, so we have a mover and a seconder. Councillors, so all in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Justine. 11.7, sewage utility charges, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. This report presents the sewage utility charges for the 2021 financial year for consideration by councillors. Livingstone Shire Council only has one declared sewer area, being the Capricorn Coast Sewerage Scheme. The amount of the charge being proposed for the 2021 financial year is $829 for a connected property and $788 for a vacant land. As a whole, the sewerage business activity is currently recovering all of its costs in aggregate, but is slightly below a commercial cost recovery requirements as required under the full cost pricing principles. This means that the scheme as a whole is generating a small surplus, which is reinvested back into that scheme to fund future capital renewal works and investment in upgrades and so forth for the scheme. Happy to take any questions from councillors.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Any questions of the CFO from the floor? Okay, so we'll go to debate, councillors. May I have a mover and a seconder for the sewage utility charges report, please? Would the portfolio councillor like to move? Councillor Friend, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Bello. Okay, Councillor Friend, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sewage is something we don't really want to think about. We all need it. It's a part of our everyday life on a number of occasions. After becoming the portfolio member, I've learnt the amount of work that goes into the maintenance of our infrastructure, the supplying of new infrastructure, and I never would have thought that I would have been excited over sewage. This all costs money. It costs a lot of money, and we need this infrastructure moving forward. We all want to live a healthy life, and we all want our sewage to be treated accordingly. So these costs for the sewage are very, very important. Often people have said, why do I need to pay a sewage charge on my rates when I don't have a house, when I have vacant land? And they need to realise that the sewer infrastructure runs past that property, and when they're ready to build, they can just tap into it. They don't need to approach council for a quote for them to pay their own costs to lay the pipes. So moving forward, this is how it's always been and how it will always be. So I hope I've cleared up for the members of the community why they do pay that vacant land charge. But I do commend this to the table and look forward to more exciting sewage discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Councillor Bello, would you like to speak to the report?
I will just primarily to say that when it's working well, nobody really wants to talk about it. Nobody does talk about it. When it's not working well, it becomes one hell of an issue. And there are pockets around our shire that have been ongoing, and Cooey Bay in particular is something that comes up whenever we get a bit of rain. They can often have overflow. So I guess we want to assure people that we're identifying those problem areas and we're trying to put the available resources into it to overcome them. It won't happen overnight, but we recognise that it does need to happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. Is anyone speaking against the report? Okay. So, councillors, I'll open the floor. Is anyone else prepared to speak to the report? Okay, we've got a mover in Councillor Friend, a seconder in Councillor Bello. So we'll go to the vote, councillors. All in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous, Justine. 11.8, Madam CFO, the water utility charges, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This report presents the water utility charges for the 2021 financial year for all 4 of our water supply schemes that we have within the region. For clarification, this includes the Capricorn Coast water supply charges, the Caves and Marlborough water supply scheme, the Norimba water supply scheme, and the Ogmore water supply scheme. Water charges are set to recover all of the costs associated with the provision of water services by council in the financial year. These costs include loan interest, depreciation, the cost of ongoing maintenance and the operation of the system, including treatment plant operations and the provision of infrastructure. Council will charge all land connected to its water supply or capable of connection to the supply a 2-part tariff for the period 1 July 2020 to 30th of June. So this comprises of a single tier access charge for land connected to water supply or capable of connection to the supply, and a multi-tiered consumption charge for residential users and a single tier charge for non-residential users. We also have the vacant land charge for each of the scheme is also equivalent to the 20mm metre size access charge.
Thank you, Madam CFO, and just point out to members of the community watching and the gallery that some of these schemes subsidise other schemes, and what Councillor Hutton was alluding to earlier in one of his addresses to the table is that he's foreshadowing that we'll be doing some significant work around this in the coming 6 to 9 months to try and bring some sort of, I suppose, equity into the scheme or schemes. So, councillors, are there any questions of the CFO? Okay, so we'll go into the debate. So may I have a mover and a seconder for this report, please? Councillor Mather moving, seconded Councillor Friend. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Mather, would you like to speak to the report?
Just very briefly, thanks, Mr. Mayor. As was alluded, there will be further discussions, quite in-depth discussions in relation to water charges and who pays what in the future. You're right, Mr. Mayor. There is quite a lot of subsidisation in relation to the schemes, especially the Caves, Marlborough, Ogmore, and that'll be a topic that we will involve the people when we have those discussions here. There are a number of issues that people don't understand out there, the consumers, that is. I guess it depends on how many people live in the house as to how much water gets used. I don't think they understand it. They feel that we need to make the water cheaper. But I tell you what, if anybody went and got a carton of 4X, they wouldn't hesitate about the price if it went up. But they seem to do it with water, and yet it's the most critical factor in our lives. Mr. Mayor, if we had the opportunity to do things the way we want to, it would be simple. But everybody consumes differently, and our difficulty at the moment is getting our rates out within a short period of time after the meters have been read. And we've talked about this at length, and there'll be people who will not understand that there is a time frame involved and it coincides with our budgets. But that's another matter that we'll be dealing with as we go along. But I think at this particular time, the two to three tiers is another one that confuses people, and we will be discussing that also. But when we do our public consultations around the Shire, we need to get it right, get the information to the people so they understand where we're sitting. And if we can find something in the middle that makes it work for everybody, then I think we'd have gained something by that.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Councillor Friend would like to speak to the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, first of all, our water in Livingstone Shire is one of the most pristine. Perhaps not the most pristine in the state, but one of the most pristine. We're right up there. Our beautiful Kelly's Dam and the water treated coming from the pipeline from Rockhampton as well. And we do need that. We need all the water that we can get in our shire as we're growing exponentially. So also I would like to point out, thank you Councillor Mather, you've basically said most of what I was going to say. However, I'd also like to point out to the community that if you do have a leak and it's a concealed leak, Livingstone Shire Council does give a rebate, gives a rebate once every 5 years, and that's a lot more than other councils give. It is a gift, it's not a right, and we've decided that we're going to be looking into that a little bit further as well. But at this stage, when you do have a concealed leak, please contact council and we'll see if we can give you that gift of some sort of a rebate back. And I just wanted to pass that on because there's been a number of questions to me recently in relation to concealed leak rebates. So thank you very much for your time, and I commend this to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Is anyone wishing to speak against the report? Councillor Hutton.
Only very briefly, Mr. Mayor. As previously stated, I'm unable to support this motion and the charges provided for in this motion today, as I do feel that they conflict with the values that we've espoused unanimously when we supported the revenue policy. And for that reason and that reason alone, I won't be supporting this motion today.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone care to speak for the motion? Okay, councillors, we'll go to the vote on this one then. So we have a mover in Councillor Mather, a seconder in Councillor Friend. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Against? What's your vote recorded, Councillor Hutton? Thank you. Which brings us, councillors, to 11.9, which is the Waste Management Utility Charges Report. Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. This report presents the waste management charges for the 2021 financial year. The waste management utility charges incorporate the general waste and recycling charges applied based on the number of bins at the property. Commercial charges are levied per bin, per collection relative to the type of service outlined within the schedule of waste collection and recycling charges. So Council has two broad categories of services, being our domestic services and our commercial services. And within each of those, we have our standard offering being combined waste and recycling for domestic, additional collection services, particular annual charge for Ogmore waste collection, and Great Keppel Island also has their own particular annual charge reflective of defraying part of the cost of the additional costs associated with transportation for waste for that site. It's a very similar story with our commercial services as well, being that there are additional or separate line items for Ogmore and Great Keppel Island. These charges align with the adoption that was undertaken on the 6th of February 2018 meeting by Council, which specified the designated waste collection areas.
Thank you, Madam CFO, and noting to members of the community and the gallery that we will also be retaining the dump vouchers, for want of a better term. So 12 of those will be issued with rates notices throughout the year. So, Councillor Friend, as the Portfolio Councillor, would you like to move this one? A seconder, please. Councillor Bello, thank you. Councillor Friend, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Waste is another essential service that we all sometimes even take for granted. We have our rubbish, we throw it away. A lot more people, members of the community, are becoming more aware of recycling and upcycling also. And there's very exciting things happening in our waste department. I'd like to commend our waste staff and management within Livingston. They work extremely hard so that the community doesn't have to think about it. And they work hard behind the scenes. This is a necessity. I really have nothing more to say than it needs to be passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Councillor Bello, would you like to speak to the report?
Yeah, in speaking to this motion, I'm probably picking up on the points that Councillor Hutton raised in relation to the water. I believe it'd be fair to say that some of the users on this scheme are probably not covering the full cost for the service. be that Great Keppel Island and perhaps Ogmore, and some of the users there. And I guess that presents a conundrum, or the complexities of trying to work out what's fair and equitable, and how do you absorb the cost of some of those outlying areas that just through geography or where they are make it so much more difficult to provide that service. I guess the good news is that's something that we collectively recognise and acknowledge is there, and we're going to continue as we did this budget cycle and process. We'll be continuing. That journey will start again not long after this one, and we'll be looking to refine it and apply those underlying principles of equity and fairness and what have you to that. And there will be changes, perhaps even in this space going forward. And that's not to alarm the people who are captured under those areas, but it's to tell our whole community that we recognise as a business we need to be applying, the best possible practices that we can for the greater good of the entire Shire. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. So I'll open the floor for discussion now. Councillors, anyone wish to speak to the report? Okay, so anyone speaking against? Councillor Hutton, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I commend Councillor Bello for his articulation of some of the challenges that we face. And it's always going to be a challenge around identifying that fairness and that equity and equality that we're seeking for through this process. My concern, as I've expressed, is that we're perpetuating something. We have identified it, we've got the reports to speak to it. Now it's a matter of prioritising action on it. I acknowledge again that we are planning on doing work starting in August when we start working on the 2021 financial budget, or 2021-22 financial budget. So I commend that we're going to get into this space, but I am concerned that it does conflict with the values that we've expressed when we adopted the revenue policy, and therefore won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. All right, councillors, the floor is open. Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Okay, we have a mover in Councillor Friend, a seconder in Councillor Bello. So I'll go to the vote. Councillors, all in favour? Those against? Would you like your vote recorded, Councillor? Thank you, councillors. That's carried. And that brings us to 11.10. Madam CFO, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This report presents for the adoption of the discount to encourage prompt payment of rates and charges for the 2021 financial year. So Council is proposing to offer a discount to encourage on-time payment of rates and utility charges and to reward ratepayers for the responsible management of their accounts. We know from historical information that around 90% of ratepayers take advantage of this incentive and ensure that their half-yearly rates and utility notices are paid by the due date for discount. Discount at the rate of 10% will be allowed on the gross council rates and charges, excluding any charge specifically excluded from the discount entitlement. So discount will be applied on the gross differential general rates, sewage utility charges, water utility charges, and waste management utility charges, excluding the water consumption charges, emergency services levy, any special and separate rates and charges, on the provision that full payment of the amount outstanding, including any overdue rates and interest to the date of payment, is paid by the due date on the original notice of the levy.
Thank you, Madam CFO. So for members of the community in the gallery, we are retaining the 10% discount as the CFO has stated, and a 35-day payment period. We note around the state that some of our colleagues in local government have reduced the level of discount. I think it's safe to say this council entertained that notion for less than a nanosecond, and it was never on our radar to do that, recognising that members of our community need and appreciate that discount. So we just wanted to flag that, that notwithstanding what other councils are doing, we certainly have never entertained that particular concept. So, councillors, are there any questions of the CFO? Okay, so we'll go to the debate. Thank you. So may I have a mover and a seconder for this? Moved Councillor Eastwood, seconded Councillor Lynch. We'll give Councillor Lynch a turn. Councillor Mather. And Councillor Eastwood, would you like to speak to the report?
It's just briefly, Mr. Mayor. To me, this is a double whammy. We have some of the most expensive rates in the state, and this brings them down to a more fair and equitable rate for those that get in early and make the effort to pay. But it also encourages those to pay early so that our coffers fill up and our money is already there to spend. So I just think that it's a double whammy, a great thing for us, and it's a win-win all the way around. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. And can I get you to turn your microphone off? Thanks. Thank you. Councillor Lynch, would you like to speak to the report?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do echo your sentiments. We did have discussion and we looked at different percentages in regards to giving discount, and 10% is fair and equitable. In these challenging times with COVID, this is a welcome relief to our community, and I thank you, Madam CFO, for the hard work and input you've put into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lynch. Anyone speaking against the motion? Okay, we'll open the floor up for discussion on this. Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I get the two previous speakers have forgotten something. Yes, we might have some of the highest rates in the state, but we also have some of the most generous discounts too. And at the same time, when you go to the next topic, you'll find that our interest rates are lower than most, and our discount is higher. Anybody who did that in private practice would go broke very quickly, but this council is very sympathetic towards people who are having difficulty. And we are demonstrating that. We've also got many schemes that people can undertake if they're having difficulty in their own homes paying their rates. So there's an incentive for early payment, 10%. There's only a penalty for 7% if you get into trouble and you're overdue. But in the meantime, you've got that middle ground where you can come in and talk to the staff and say, look, can you help me? I'm behind for 3 payments. How am I going to do it? We've got those people with the expertise to do that. So everybody's catered for. And that's all I need to say, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Okay, councillors, we have a mover in Councillor Eastwood, a seconder in Councillor Lynch. I'll go to the vote on this one. All in favour? Thank you. Those against? Carried unanimously, Justine. Thank you. Which brings us now to 11.11 on interest, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. The local government regulation outlines the maximum statutory rate of interest being the prescribed rate for the day of 8% plus the bank bill yield rate. From 1 July 2020, the Department of Local Government Racing and Multicultural Affairs has prescribed that maximum interest rate is 8.53%. In 1920, it was 9.83%, and in 2018-19, it was set at 11%. Council has identified that this high-level rate of interest is unintentionally increasing the difficulty of our ratepayers to pay down their arrears. Council recognises that many of these ratepayers are genuinely attempting to pay down their overdue balances. Therefore, Council has opted to maintain a level of interest applied to 7% and is being recommended for the 3rd year in a row. The 7% per annum, compounded monthly, to be calculated at the end of the financial half year in which they fall due and charged at the end of each month until the arrears are paid in full.
Thank you, Madam CFO. And can I echo the comments of Councillor Mather? This is actually a level of interest that is below the recommendation from the powers that be. But before people get to a point where they look like being charged interest or they are going to be overdue, I would encourage them to come and talk to council officers, because there are a number of mechanisms in place now whereby we can assist in you paying your rates either on a periodic basis or according to a number of other opportunities that we're now providing, and they will be outlined in a report yet to be considered. But please, if you're having difficulty, or you look like having difficulty paying your rates, get in touch with us as soon as possible, because our staff are here to help you with that. So, councillors, are there any questions of the CFO? Okay, so we'll go to debate on it. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? A mover? I'll move that, move myself, Justine. Councillor Lynch, you're seconding. Thank you. I've had my little say on it, councillors. So, Councillor Lynch, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, 7% 3 years in a row is a great outcome for the community. And as Mr. Mayor said, if you are struggling with paying your rates, again, come to council. We don't know what the outcome of COVID is. We don't know what people are going through at the moment. So I really do encourage those people that might be struggling to pay their rates to contact council straight away.
Thank you, Councillor Lynch. Okay, so anyone speaking against the motion? Okay, so I'll open the floor for discussion. Councillor Hutton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And it is undoubtedly positive to see the sector is now aligning to what Livingston knew 3 years ago, which was that councils are ultimately community corporations. We're built on community, and you don't help someone who's in a hole by making them dig further. So having high compounding interest was never going to help someone in a situation where they were challenged. It was only going to make it harder for them to get out. Like has been said, 3 years ago we did reduce our compounding interest rate by almost half, and now the sector has done the same, although it is still good to see that our rate is still actually lower than what the regulations are stating. The importance of knowing our role as a community corporation in support of people, both in our obligation to each other, our responsibility as citizens to contribute through the paying of our rates, as well as our obligation to look after each other and protect each other when we are having challenging times, means that this is just one piece of that pie. The Mayor's referred to the myriad of ways that our finance team and officers of council have, throughout the course of Livingston's history, always sought to provide opportunities for ratepayers to find ways to contribute to their rates, be it bi-weekly, be it via fortnightly payments, whatever it takes. We're there to try and help people make sure that they're meeting their obligations both to society and to our community, but also that we don't want anyone to be destitute because of an unreasonable or an aspiration that's too high for them to meet. So I commend this report to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Okay, councillors, we have a mover and a seconder. So I'll go to the vote. All in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously, Justine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This report seeks endorsement of the levy and payment periods for the 2021 rates and charges. So there are three components to the officer's recommendation. The first component seeks for endorsement of half-yearly rates and utility charges billing and water consumption to be levied at quarterly intervals on a rolling basis. It also seeks council to make a resolution of the local government regulation to allow the deemed water meter read to be 2 weeks before the day or 2 weeks after the day the meter is proposed to be read. It also seeks to continue with the 35 days date of issue of the rates notice for payment of the rates and utility charges and quarterly water consumption charges. So it's continuing. There are no changes proposed to what has occurred over the past 12 months.
Thank you, Madam CFO. So noting councillors and members of the community that there's no change to past practice proposed within this report. So the frequency of levying of rates notices and water notices will remain the same as has been in the past. Councillors, are there any questions of the CFO? Okay, so we'll go to debate. May I have a mover and a seconder for this, please? Councillor May, the moving. Seconder, thank you. Councillor Eastwood, thanks. Councillor Mather, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't prolong this one. We have said previously that we will be discussing this water structure and the water charging and the periodic distribution of rate notices as we meet with the people down the track. And we've got a wide range of discussions to have with them, but this one with people on the water schemes is most important because there is some distress out there as to how it can be handled better. And I'm sure we'll be up to that debate when the time comes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Councillor Eastwood, did you wish to speak to the report?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone speaking against the report? Okay, so we'll open the floor for discussion on this. Any discussion, councillors? Okay, so we have a mover in Councillor Mather, a seconder in Councillor Eastwood. We'll go to the vote. All in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously, Justine. Thank you. 11.13, rating, rebates and concessions, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. This report presents the rates, rebates and remissions policy for consideration by Council for the 2021 financial year. The rates, rebates and remissions policy is reviewed annually in conjunction with the budget. The policy may also be reviewed at any stage throughout the financial year upon resolution of Council. There are a number of broad categories that are covered off as part of this policy. The first broad category is the approved government pensioners. So it's proposed to maintain the remission of 20% of up to a maximum of $300 for eligible pensioners on all rates levied in respect of the property in which they both own and reside. A provisional amount of $756,000 has been made in this year's budget to accommodate that high level of pension rebate. The next broad category is the remissions, rates, rebates and remissions provided for not-for-profit or charitable organisations. So Council grants a varied level of concessions to charitable and other not-for-profit organisations, including community groups such as the Surf Lifesaving Clubs, community showgrounds, community kindergartens, rural fire brigades, community arts associations and charitable organisations assisting the aged or disadvantaged and sporting clubs and other associations. A provisional amount has been made of $126,000 in this year's budget to provide those rebates. The last category is provided for nature refuge agreements. So these provide assistance for the conservation of significant natural resources in private land holdings in rural areas, which can be taken to address the problems of land degradation and loss of natural resources. It is estimated by offering this remission, Council is supporting the management of 1,086 hectares of land protected by nature refuge agreements. A provisional amount of $5,700 has been made for this rebate.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Are there any questions of the CFO? Okay, councillors, we'll go into debate on this one. So, Councillor Hutton, you are moving. Seconding, Councillor Eastwood. Thank you very much. Councillor Hutton, would you like to speak to the report?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. This is a significant policy because it speaks to how Livingston is both an advocate, an actor, but also a partner with the community in which we are entrusted to look after. We are an advocate in that while we're giving the $300 discount to our pensioners, we're also advocating both at the Local Government Association and Queensland level for cost of living pressures to be identified and dealt with, recognising that while our contribution to the rates remission for pensioners has gone up each and every year, well, consistently close to $100 in the last 6 years, the remission that's offered by the state government for rates has actually remained stagnant for some 20 years. It also sees us being an actor in participating in ensuring that $126,000 will not be paid by not-for-profits, by charities and other organisations, because we recognise that the work that they do and the money that they collect and the money they're given is so important in their field, and it shouldn't be taken back by this council, but instead invested in the community. We couldn't replicate what they do and invest it the way that they can, so we partner with them and support that. And thirdly, the one that really I was so proud when we introduced it some 2 years ago was the nature refuge agreements. We all know that there are challenging times in terms of the access to land, the access to green corridors, wildlife pathways, etc., by supporting these property owners in maintaining their land in pristine, beautiful states. In fact, they have to go through a whole policy of state government intervention to guarantee them that they get to hold their status as nature refuge. So it's not just that they've left it go wild, they actually have to manicure it, they're looking after the gardens, they're protecting and pulling out the invasive weeds. Our support of that ensures that there is 1,086 hectares of land that is protected in our shire, and it goes across. We've got land over behind St Brendan's, we've got land out at Kawarra, we've got land down on Tamby, all supported under this policy, and I think that's a really positive thing for our community, and that's why the rating, rebates and concessions policy is so significant and reflects our obligation as a council to our community.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Councillor Eastwood, would you like to speak to the report?
Yes, just briefly, Mr Mayor, as Councillor Hutton's covered the gist of it. What we need to remember is that these organisations, these charities, sporting bodies, the pensioners, they're a great asset to our community, and they're what make our community great. That's what makes Livingston so livable, and we just need to keep supporting them so that they continue to support us and make this community what it is today. Thank you.
Well said, gentlemen, on both occasions. Councillors, is anyone speaking against the report? Councillors, can I get you to, Councillor Hutton, Mather, you wish to speak? Okay, I'll just open it up to debate now. Councillor Mather?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Just an observation, Mr Mayor. I don't have any objection to this at all. While we're looking at subsidising schemes, not for profit, pension rebates, we recognise needs out there, sporting bodies. They are all being subsidised by somebody else. So if we have any thought in our mind that we don't like subsidisation because it's not fair, it's not equitable, as we've heard today, we've got another example here, but we support this. We're just showing a little bit of inconsistency there, but I support it as well. And I also support the cross-subsidisation where necessary. So we can't have it both ways. I object to this, but I accept that. So we got to think about that.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Councillors, so any further discussion on this report?
Yeah, if you would allow me, Mr Chairman, councillors, for me, it's a no-brainer to support this, and that's for a number of reasons, but primarily it's not a contest out there who deserves the most, because ultimately they're all giving something in the capacity that they can, and whether their interest is, you know, the Yeppoon Swans or the scouting organisation or a nature refuge, whatever it is, that's the sort of, I guess, the fabric of our community out there. That's why we get out of bed each day and, you know, send our kids off to school, or we take our grandkids to daycare centres, or whatever the case may be, knowing that outside of that, there's a whole spectrum of families and collectives that they can be part of. And that makes for for meaningful and positive lives. And to think that this council, really it's not just this council, it's actually the ratepayers and the residents out there that we're deciding a portion of that money is going to go to supporting those community groups. So it's a privilege really to be here and actually agree and support that initiative. So on behalf of the community, we say thank you. Just something to point out, in here, as a result of the COVID, some of our sporting clubs, and no doubt many of these clubs have been hit pretty hard in their ability to raise much needed revenue. They haven't had their canteens operating. They've been shut down. Things are very difficult out there, and we acknowledge that. Whilst it's not definitive in here today, a quantum that this council may be prepared to consider, there is a commitment, I believe, discussions have already been had, led by the Mayor, that straight after this budget, we'll be coming together to decide how can we support those communities in the very near future. We need to reach out to them and ask them and really better understand what their predicament is. And that's a commitment that we'll be making as a council, I believe. I'm prepared to, flag that. And in the understanding that we know that there's a need there, and we want to try and meet that need in whatever way we can, based on our ability to afford it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. Any other councillor wish to speak to the report? Okay, councillors, we have a mover in Councillor Hutton, a seconder in Councillor Eastwood. We'll go to the vote on this one. All in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously, Justine, thanks. Which brings us to 11.14, Statement of Estimated Financial Position, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. It is a requirement under local government regulation that councillors also receive a statement of the estimated financial position for the previous financial year, and that is what this report is presenting today. Councillors will also recall that they recently adopted the Q3 revised budget for the 19-20 in early June. So this report aims to identify any significant activities or material changes that had occurred between the adoption of the Q3 revised budget and the end of the financial year. There's one main financial transaction, and that's the bringing forward the settlement of some parcels of land at the Homemaker Centre and Gateway that were forecast in the 19-20 Q3 revised budget to be occurring in the 2021 financial year. Those settlements took place on the 19-20 side, so therefore we had to adjust the estimated position for that. So the impact of that was that cash had increased by $2.4 million based on the Q3 forecast. The operational result had reduced by $42,000 to be a deficit of $1.8 million. There is no change in our debt balance of $75.5 million at 30th of June, and no changes to the capital program. Any carryovers will be identified during the revised budget process to undertake in September, October.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Councillors, are there any questions of the CFO? Okay, so just making note for members of the community in the gallery, we are estimating at this point in time that we'll bring in a surplus for 2019-20. No?
It'll be a deficit for 19-20.
I should put my glasses on, beg your pardon. We do have in excess of $1 billion worth of assets that we control. So I guess by anyone's standard, that is a significant amount of responsibility. And they are obviously community assets. So councillors, we'll go into debate on this one. May I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you. Mover, Councillor Hutton. Seconded. I'll move it, so I'll second it, sorry. So Councillor Hutton, would you like to speak to the report?
Only very briefly, Mr Mayor, to acknowledge that these papers reflect the challenges that have been faced by our council and our community in the post-COVID period, and it's a reflection of the things that have occurred in our community in this last 6 and 12 months. I commend the work of the officers to actually restrain and hold back wherever possible expenses and things so that we are able to have a limited, while still substantial, operating deficit in that year, recognising that this will be actually the first out of 6 deficits for the operation. So we show time and time again that the executive leadership team and the officers of this organisation work incredibly hard, and it's just when you're faced with a global pandemic, I don't think it becomes something that's in your control to no longer be able to quite massage and manage your budget quite as the external influences became too large. Recognising that in accepting these papers, providing the starting point for the 10-year forecast, we can see again that Livingston continues on in document 11.17. We continue on a plan of good cash balances, good operating surpluses, and good continuous payment of debt, as we have been since 2018. So thank you to the staff.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. And again, forgive my indiscretion, Madam CFO, I was looking at the net result as opposed to the operating deficit. Councillors, are there any, we'll open the floor for discussion. Any comments on this report? Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder, and Councillor Hutton and myself. So we'll go to the vote on this one. All in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously, Justine, thank you. 11.15, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. 11.15. This report presents the 2021 debt policies for Council's consideration for adoption in accordance with our long-term financial plan. No debt is budgeted to be borrowed, so no new borrowings for the 2021 financial year are planned. Council's identified alternate funding sources for the 2021 Capital Works program. Over the forecast 10-year period of the 2021 long-term financial plan, this policy outlines the debt will only be used as a funding source once in the 2024-25 financial year. That particular borrowing relates to 50% of the capital cost of a new cell at the Yeppoon landfill. So the more waste we divert from the existing cell, thereby extending its life, the less requirement there may need to be for those future loan borrowings. But at this stage, we have made a provision for that. Council's total debt is forecast to decrease from approximately $75.5 million, that's the balance at 30th of June 2020, to just under $12 million at the end of the 10-year forecast period in 30th of June 2030. At the end of the current financial year, the debt will reduce down to $70.2 million.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Councillors, are there any questions for the CFO? Okay, so we'll go to debate on this one. Councillors, may I have a mover and a seconder for this report, please? A mover? Councillor Hutton, thank you. I'll second it. Thank you. Hutton, would you like to speak to the report?
Only very briefly to reinforce the comments that the CFO has made around the fact that council has year on year out been repaying between $5 and $6 million worth of debt, and that process is continuing over the 10-year forecast. We can see in the policy that it outlines the grounds upon which council would look at borrowing money. It's not for operational expenses, which we all know would be bad debt and would be a bad use of ratepayers' financial capacity, but rather to look at investment in long-term infrastructure where we would discuss intergenerational equity and also look at the capacity of this infrastructure to actually generate income back to the organisation and to council to pay for itself. I think it reflects back to what Councillor Bello spoke to about having assets that when you have a business, you've got to make sure you treat your assets like a business, make sure you're maintaining them like a business, and obviously art debt policy has to be written to produce that. And I think the community can take great assurity from this policy that it sets out clearly the grounds upon which Livingston has borrowed money and will borrow money. And I referenced that the policy talks about it being a modern approach, which I think's, hopefully good business has been doing this for a long time, but in the public sector, there's always that divide there, and so I recommend it to the table and its adoption.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Councillor Mather.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I don't think any of us would have a home if we didn't have any debt to purchase that home in the first instance. Debt is not a bad thing, so long as we can control it, and we've got a foreseeable income that actually guarantees those payments. Council has had a high debt for some time, and it's encouraging to see that it's on the way down. Andrea, thank you, with your team, and the will of the table. Like I said, there's got to be discipline, and there's got to be perseverance. And with the loss of the land in the Shoalwater Bay area, and perhaps around $1 million in income, we are going to find it tough making decisions in the future. We need to grow our rate base. And one of the reasons we can do this, one of the ways we can do this is to have further development. We've got to encourage development, and we've got the prime opportunity in the western suburbs by taking on a northern development corridor that will see our shire grow from the western side and not so much from the east. The land is there, the infrastructure is there, and with the will of the table and the right steering, the right people in charge, we can grow our rate base and offset the rates for this shire in the future. However, we will have some tough decisions to make, and I've got some wheelie walkers out there waiting to march the streets if the Mayor from Rockhampton wants to take over our land. We will be fighting. The wheelie walkers are out there ready to go. We don't want to have any more debt if we can help it, unless it's absolutely necessary. So while we're losing land in the far north and rates with it, we can grow more land in the western suburbs. And this is what we need to focus on now, growing our shire, to keep that debt under control and to make sure that we are in charge of our destination as far as finances go. And that's the only way to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Okay, councillors, we have a mover in Councillor Hutton and a seconder in myself. I'll go to the vote on this one. All in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously, Justine, thank you. 11.16, Madam CFO, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This report identifies the business activities that will be conducted by Council during the 2021 financial year and recommends that Council resolve to apply the Code of Competitive Conduct to Council's water and sewage, waste in caravan parks operations during the current financial year pursuant to the requirements under the Local Government Act. It also identifies that the water and sewage operations meet the requirements to be regarded as a significant business activity. So what this means is that Council is taking into consideration the requirements of the National Competition Policy and applying the requirements under the Code of Competitive Conduct. So this means taking away any advantage or disadvantage that Council will have in managing any of our activities that there are commercial providers in, so that there is no advantage or disadvantage afforded to Livingston to act as that commercial space. So there's 7 business activities that meet this criteria. So the first being the water and sewage operations. So these are regarded as a significant business activity because Council has an excess of 10,000 premises connected to the water service as at 30th of June. Building certification, waste operations and caravan parks are prescribed business activities. So these are explicitly stated in the Local Government Act that these are prescribed business activities and must be regarded as such. And other business activities are those where we know that there are commercial operators in this space, so we need to apply those same principles to car parking, car wash and cemetery operations. Happy to take any questions from councillors in regards to this report.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Are there any questions for the CFO, please?
Probably the only question I have to the CFO is just in relation to, say, land development and the Homemaker Centre, or they're obviously not captured as business activity as such. Is that because of definition or?
So they're not identified as a prescribed business activity. So the disposal of those assets is covered under a different part of the legislation. So we do consider that as a disposal of assets under the contracting component of the local government regulation. The accounting standards also require that all of those associated costs are captured for those types of activities. So whilst an ordinary person would consider that to be a business activity of council, that type of work is covered under a separate piece of legislation, or separate piece under the regulation, I should say.
No, thank you for that. And it was probably, I consider myself an ordinary person. I was seeking, to me, they reflect business activity, but obviously there's a different definition for them. So thank you for that response.
Any other questions for the CFO? Okay, councillors, we'll go to debate on it. So may I have a mover and a seconder for the report, please? A mover, Councillor Bello, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Mather. Councillor Bello, did you wish to speak to the report?
Just very briefly, it's important that councils can provide services, obviously, and there's a list of them here that have been determined that they actually qualify as a business model. What's the right word? Sorry, help me out. I've lost my train of thought. A business activity, but most importantly that they can demonstrate that they are doing it in a competitive way, that it's not getting benefited above and beyond what the private sector has to comply with. So, and I think the services there that are provided for those businesses are very essential for our communities. Our coastal caravan parks are certainly well received. Things like cemetery operations are not easy to do, but they're critical for communities to have and to be ensure that they're done well. So, and I think Livingston does an exceptional job, so I commend it to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. Are there any other, sorry, Councillor Mather, did you wish to speak to the report?
Just very briefly, thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's up to each and every one of us to identify opportunities for business ventures. They come in all different shapes and sizes and at different occasions. While we are looking for business opportunities of our own. I think we must keep our eyes open also to encourage other people. And I think the western suburbs of this shire have the right temperature, if you want to use that word. They're right for the pickings, for business ventures out there. They may not be ours, but we can encourage other people to come and invest for us. And that has the same effect as offsetting rates, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Does anyone else wish to speak to the report? Okay, councillors. We have a mover in Councillor Bello, a seconder in Councillor Mather. We'll go to the vote. All in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Thanks, Justine. Okay, councillors, this brings us to the last report for the meeting. What I'll do is I'll go to the CFO and ask her to deliver her report, and then we might just break with protocol a little bit, I think, and then give all the councillors an opportunity to speak to the budget, and then we'll go to the formalities of the vote. Are we all okay with that? Okay. All right, Madam CFO.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently to how I've presented every other report, and actually have a presentation to, I guess, just provide a little bit more ease of understanding of the budgeted financial statements of the legislation requirements. So the resolution for this particular one is the adoption of the budget and long-term financial forecast. The presentation will dive into some of the key components to help our community and councillors and those in the gallery understand the breakup of our particular budget. So the report includes a number of requirements, being the statement of financial position, statement of cash flows, statement of income and expenditure, statement of changes in equity, including our long-term financial forecast. We also have a number of prescribed relevant measures of financial sustainability that we're required to discuss, and also includes a percentage of change in the total value of rates and charges levied. So if I could just go to the first slide. Other way. There we go, thank you. So the budget was prepared under the philosophy or motto of plan to deliver, deliver to plan. So this has been developed and centred around strategically aligning all of our activities, projects and programs to our community plan. So the council had adopted the community plan late last year, the corporate plan early this year, and today has recently adopted the operational plan. So the budget flows in from that. So the headlines from the budget, next slide, thanks Justine, is that it is a just under $137 million budget. Revenue increases are in line with CPI. Councils have today voted to remove the non-owner occupied rating categories. We've maintained the $300 pensioner rebate. There are no new borrowings. There are no reduction in services planned for this year. And there is a reduced surplus due to impacts of COVID-19 on a variety of activities and revenue streams for council. Thanks, Justine. So our focus this year has been to engage the community. We undertook an online community survey. I think we had just over 980 respondents, and I'm really excited about what that plan will look like for the 21-22 financial year. We've taken a tact of maintaining and embedding a customer-centric focus. We've developed 4-year service delivery plans across the organisation. The intent will be for the 21-22 financial year that we actually share and discuss those with our community as part of our community engagement strategy. We've spent a lot of time and effort in embedding robust project governance. So every project that we have in year 1 does have a business case and strategic justification for consideration in our 4-year program. I guess the best way to sum up what our financial strategy has been is around responsible financial management. We've been on a path for a number of years, and this year has certainly reflected the organisation and councillors' appetite to stay the course for that. So that has resulted in an operational surplus of just over $300,000 for the current financial year. This also includes a significant capital investment of just under $42 million, with debt reducing by $5.3 million. Council maintains healthy cash reserves of $38.4 million, but this does include a 2% change in rate revenue, with no reduction in service levels. The impact on our ratepayers is that we have 69.7% of our ratepayers that will have a $100 increase or less on their rates this year. It should be noted that just over 1/3 of our ratepayers will have an increase of $0, so that means an effective decrease on their rates for the 2021 financial year. Our capital works program is broadly broken down into whether it's an investment into new or upgrading existing assets, and the value of that investment is $25.9 million, or whether we're investing in renewal of our existing infrastructure, and that's $15.6 million. Council has been exceptionally fortunate in obtaining more than half of external funding through state and federal government grants and subsidies for the 2021 financial year. As you can see, we consider these our broad asset classes. So building and facilities, an investment of just under $3 million on a variety of activities, infrastructure, with our largest spend being on our largest asset class being roads, drainage and bridges of $20.7 million. Sewage, also a significant investment in our sewage infrastructure this year. So the next few slides are aligning some of our key significant projects and activities in accordance with our themes. And some of these aren't the big multi-million-dollar projects, but they're still projects that are really important to our community. So for Livable Livingston, we are investing in $70,000 worth of disability access upgrades to the Yeppoon Lagoon, a new amenity building at Williamson Creek picnic area, and accessibility upgrades to Daniel Park. We're also planning to complete the first stage of the Capricorn Coast Memorial Gardens, construction of a new art gallery at Emu Park, and the extension and upgrade of the Mill Gallery for 2021. Thriving Livingston, a really important document, is the completion and implementation of the Livingston Reconciliation Action Plan. We've also received funding to construct a new female amenities at the Barmarie Sports Complex, and there'll be upgrades to stimulate the economic development and growth at Keppel Sands, with upgrades to the Keppel Sands Caravan Park. There'll be some new shade structures at the Lagoon Precinct, and a Great Keppel Island picnic shelters and big belly bins, which are pretty exciting waste bins over at Great Keppel Island. Thanks. Under Natural Livingston, we've got a fairly intensive investment in our infrastructure for Natural Livingston this year. So we're installing solar power at the recently upgraded Yeppoon sewage treatment plant. We're undertaking a big project in regards to our Yeppoon water recycling augmentation project, and we're constructing a resource recovery area at the Yeppoon landfill. Leading Livingston, so we're investing just under $900,000 in our sealed road pavement renewals and $1.4 million on our unsealed road pavement renewals. A huge focus will be on embedding strategic asset management planning and improving our approach to risk management with a enterprise risk management capability project. We're also looking at modernising and reviewing all of our local and subordinate laws over the next 12 months. With Future Livingston, we're investing in entryway and place branding signs, placemaking initiatives at Marlborough. We're investing $2 million across footpaths and cycle paths across the Shire. We're undertaking some options analysis for, electric vehicle charging stations and installation of storm tide markers in prominent locations along the coast. As you can see, our operating revenue is largely driven from our net rates and utility charges. The increase from the 1920 is a combination of natural growth and assessment, changes in rating categories, valuation adjustments, and the general increases adopted by council in the minimum charges and rate in the dollar this year. Our second highest is operational grants and subsidies. The large component of that is the Commonwealth Government's financial assistance grant, estimated to be at $4.2 million out of that $7.1 million. Whilst it's a little bit difficult to see up on the screen, this illustrates our operational expenditure by service, and as you can see, the light blue colour on the right-hand side of the graph there, our major investment is on our infrastructure assets and those associated services for each of those. Our major categories within operational expenditure is, our largest item is materials and services. So of what you can see up there, it's $34.7 million. A large proportion of that is in regards to contractual costs for waste disposal and collection, bulk water purchases, contractors engaged for the maintenance, to assist with the maintenance of council roads, parks and buildings. Electricity, fuel and insurance costs also make up that. Employee benefits, so this associates all of our costs associated with our employees, including their remuneration, superannuation, fringe benefits, tax, training and workers' compensation insurance. Employee costs have increased in the 2021 budget, but this increase is in relation to a reduction in the capitalised employee expenses. So we have more of our workforce redirected to operational activities, and this is specifically related to works, contract works being undertaken on behalf of TMR in that space. There are no increases to established workforce numbers in 2021 in an effort to minimise costs and still maintain appropriate service levels during this difficult financial period. The third highest component is depreciation and amortisation. So depreciation and amortisation reflect the decline in the value of assets, and this is around $22.2 million. A 10-year capital works program. So council is forecast to invest just over $300 million in community infrastructure over the next 10 years. As you can see, our two highest years in the 10-year forecast are year 1 and 2 of the budget period. But the organisation is committed to delivering on those identified projects within that period of time. It should be noted that those projects in the outer years are still subject to requirement of business cases and further detail analysis on the costs associated with all of those. And out of that spend, as I mentioned earlier, there is only one borrowing forecast of $2 million to deliver that level of investment into our community infrastructure. As you can see, this graph quite clearly illustrates our debt balance, or total borrowings, declining quite rapidly over the 10-year forecast period. As I mentioned, there's only one borrowing forecast in that 10-year period, with the 10-year balance to be just under $12 million in 2030. Our cash balances. So in order to maintain a level of working capital, council aims to maintain a cash balance of around $20 million. This reflects 3 months worth of activities or operational requirements for council. In the medium term, we will have to monitor cash closely, as we always do over the forecast period. This is heavily reliant on the capital works program being delivered in accordance with the 10-year forecast. We also don't, with our capital program, we're not relying on external grants and funding, so any additional grants that we do receive to supplement that capital works program will improve that cash balance over the medium to long term. So overall, the budget is a very responsible budget, and one that is focused on our customers being the premise and crux of all that we do at council. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Are there any questions of the CFO before we proceed further, councillors? So, councillors, rather than suspend standing orders and go into open discussion, I've just had a chat with the acting CEO. We might just proceed according to normal meeting procedure and go into debate on this particular report. Now, I would like to move this report. Can I get a seconder, please? Councillor Eastwood, thank you very much. All right, so councillors, I'll just very quickly speak to the report. There are a number of thank yous to be delivered in relation to this budget. First of all, to our community. Our community partook in the survey we did online earlier this year, and we got some terrific feedback from you in relation to what we needed to consider as part of the budget. And some of the things obviously that were raised that have found their way into this budget are things like road maintenance, both rural and urban. Connectivity via cycleways, which has been addressed in this budget. So that input from the community has been listened to, it was appreciated, and it was valued. So, Council, on behalf of the councillors, I'd just like to thank the community for their participation in the budget process. And going forward, we will continue to do that. It is certainly our intention to get you involved more and more. The second round of thanks goes to my colleagues around the council table. This has been a fairly long and arduous process, exacerbated by the fact that the elections were in March this year and we weren't appointed until early April. So between April and now, there's been a flurry of activity. As I think everyone around the table will contest, there have been 13 budget meetings to discuss what we're going to deliver as part of this budget. So thank you, councillors, and can I get you to give yourselves a round of applause for the amount of work you've all put into this. So thank you very much. And finally, and certainly not least, I'd like to express on behalf of council to the staff our appreciation for your work. And as a former officer of councils, I appreciate how much work actually is involved in delivering a budget, because one change from this table has a ripple effect through a number of documents, through a number of calculations, and through a number of different iterations. And so we appreciate the input of the staff. It is a long process for you guys as well, and of course at the end of the meeting we get to go home, but that doesn't necessarily apply to you. You're back to the office making the changes. So councillors, can I, not just to the finance team but to the staff in general, can I ask you to join me in thanking them by acclamation. In bringing down the budget, council has been focused on a number of things. Throughout the campaign, we were constantly reminded of the high level of rates within Livingstone Shire Council. And yes, we are, at this point in time, the second highest in Queensland. We're also reminded of the level of debt and the concern within the community around the level of debt. We've also been battling with the consequences from COVID-19. Amongst all of that, we've been trying to then deliver a level of service that the community expects and wants, and shaping the budget to marry with the 2050 community plan. All of these things have weighed into the consideration of this budget. And I think largely we've managed to achieve, maybe not all, but a heavy component of those things have been built into the budget, those considerations. So some of the basics, ladies and gentlemen, we've maintained the $300 rebate for pensioners and eligible concession card holders. That was a key component within council's thinking at the time, because certainly our pensioners and our concession card holders are valued members of this community. We've also retained the 10% rates increase, discount, beg your pardon, not increase. 10% rates discount on general rates, water, sewage and waste charges. That would have created a bit of consternation. Providing additional payment options for ratepayers experiencing financial difficulty has been built into this budget as well, and part of our process. So, as a number of councillors have mentioned during the discussions around this budget, if you are having difficulty paying your rates, please, please, please get in touch with us as soon as you possibly realise that's going to be your situation. We have a number of mechanisms within council to be able to assist and deal with that. We are retaining the dump vouchers, as we said before, and there is no increase in the Livingstone Shire Council workforce as part of this budget. There is no decrease either. And that's been a deliberate strategy around the table that marries with what we have with our capital works program here. And what I mean by that is, in investing so much in a capital works program, we are obviously employing people. We are employing contractors. We are buying materials within the community. So part of our contribution to the COVID-19 problem is by investing in projects so that we continue to create employment. We continue to shop locally. We continue to buy locally. So those are things that council's considered, members of the public, as part of the budget deliberations. During the election campaign, a number of people suggested or requested that we should bring in a zero rate rise. There's probably not one councillor around this room that would not have liked to have been able to do that. But the reality is, council's costs increase all the time as well. Our wages increase according to the enterprise bargaining agreement and the award situation. Our cost of acquiring materials, construction materials, other materials, increase. Our electricity and power costs increase. So if council were to award a 0% increase across the board, we would simply go backwards because our costs would be going up, but there would be no commensurate increase in our revenue. So those situations, as in your household budget, make it difficult for us to bring in a zero rate rise. So we've kept it as low as we possibly can. We've kept it at the CPI March quarter index of 2%. And as the CFO has pointed out, 0.7% of that 2% relates to valuation increases which are beyond this council's control. They are implemented by the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy through the Valuer General. So 1.3% of that 2% is actually council's increase. So in closing, councillors, and we will obviously put up with the CFO's approval, her slides on the website, and we'll distribute those to our friends at the media. The implication for ratepayers is that about 30% of our ratepayers will receive a zero rate rise or less. So in other words, a reduction in rates. From a residential ratepayers perspective, 23.9% of ratepayers will have a zero increase or less. 35% will have an increase of between $0 and $100, so $2 a week. And 20.2 will have an increase of between $100 and $200 per annum, or between $2 and $4 a week. So again, to members of the community, we attempted to keep this as low as we possibly could, recognising that everybody out there is doing it tough. So the average residential property increase will be around 1.69%, if I read the CFO's notes properly. So the highlights, ladies and gentlemen, of this budget. Firstly, the non-owner occupied rating category was removed. And there's a great deal of discussion in the community around this during the election campaign, because a number of people felt it was inequitable, a number of people felt it was a disincentive to investment here, and I think Councillor Rees commented on that in his address to the table. We're bringing in a small operating surplus of just over $300,000, which is a heck of a lot better than a deficit. We have made an ongoing commitment to our community grant programs, which is around about $400,000. As I said before, we've also got a fairly significant, capital works program in the tune of about $41.5 million. The big winner out of all of that is the roads program, roads drainage, of which Councillor Mather is the custodian of that. So that program will see work done not just in the urban areas, but also more work in the rural areas where we've obviously been the recipient of many cries for assistance from the rural areas. There are no new borrowings, ladies and gentlemen. And as the CFO very eloquently pointed out, the only borrowing we plan on doing in the next 10 years is for the cell at the landfill site in 24-25. And that will only be 50% roughly of the cost of that land, of that new cell. So we are obviously listening to the community because during the campaign, as I said, there was a very deep concern about the level of debt within this council, and we're on track now to reduce that level of debt from currently $75 million to about 11.5, I think, Andrea, in 30. And we have a fairly healthy cash balance, which is always a good thing because we try to keep, as the CFO has said, approximately 3 months worth of liquidity, and that is basically a defence against potential disasters that we haven't catered for, thought about, or planned for. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, I won't say the budget is perfect because simply by their nature, no budget is perfectly not going to satisfy everybody. Not everybody's going to be happy with it. But simply, I think we've built into this budget the majority of what the community has asked us to do, and I commend it to the table. So the seconder, Councillor Eastwood, would you like to speak to the budget?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, councillors, public. I'll keep it fairly brief because the Mayor's just about covered the crux of it. A balanced budget aims to deliver long-term financial sustainability along with catering for our community's high service demands and expectations, and that's been met with this budget. Since this council was elected in March, we've met just about weekly to discuss this budget, and that's been quite a bit more, I believe, than we have in past years. We just seem to have had a lot more meetings anyway. A good budget's going to be delivered today, albeit our rates are still too high. And yes, most of us would have loved to have had a 0% increase in rates. And maybe one day we'll be able to hit that target. And I think we should always try to aim towards that. We have a surplus, albeit a small one. And we continue to work on debt reduction whilst maintaining services, community grants, and keeping our rebates in there for the pensioners. This year has been my third budget, and I have to say that this year's the councillors' interaction have been a lot more productive. Even though we had some healthy disagreements, we were all aiming in the same direction to create a budget that was good for our whole community. And I would like to thank my fellow councillors, the Mayor, the Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Financial Officer particularly, as well as all the other officers and staff that have complemented this budget. Also, I'm really pleased to say that the wicked witch is dead. That being the landlord tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. Is anyone speaking against the budget, please? All right, so I'll open the floor for discussion. Any councillor like to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just like to say thank you to the Mayor and councillors. We have had many, many meetings, and I have to say it's been, even though we might not have agreed on everything, the table was very respectful of one another, and I really appreciate that. To the acting CEO, the executive leadership team, officers and other staff of Livingstone Shire Council, I also want to thank you and commend you for your diligent hard work and cooperation over the last few months. You're all appreciated and do an outstanding job. I particularly want to thank the Madam CFO. Thank you for your perseverance. We had never-ending questions for you, and you were very forthcoming in answering us. So your commitment, your long hours and your dedication has been very praiseworthy and noted. Whenever questions were asked of the staff, we received those answers obliging and willingly, and I thank everybody for their input in that. As a newly elected councillor, jumping into budget straight after election, it certainly has been a baptism of fire. And it has really been a mammoth task, and to understand the whole financials of this organisation, it is very in depth and involved. And So thank you everyone for assisting and helping me in, moving forward and understanding how it works. What's been presented in the budget, I thank you, and I look at these figures that have been presented as transparent and truthful. In saying that, this is a great outcome for the community. The community can put trust in this council that we are delivering a budget that is worthy for the whole community. It's imperative that we continue to support local business. It's imperative that we understand through COVID a lot of businesses were affected. It's a really great time to support those tourism industries that have been hit very hard through this time. And I wake up every morning and I'm thankful that I live in such a wonderful shire. It is a beautiful shire. Yes, our rates might be high, but we have services that we can rely on and utilise. And moving forward, I hope next year I can have a bit more vocal in saying all this, but it's a real learning curve for me, and I just want to thank everyone involved.
Thank you, Councillor Lynch. Anyone else like to speak to the report? Councillor Mather.
I think everybody's exhausted, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, it's all been said. And while I've recognised Andrea and her team and the officers involved, I want to thank my colleagues too. Took a little bit of convincing about that wicked witch, Pat. But I'm glad you saw the light. This time last year it was a very different situation. But I think persistence, fairness, equity, all those lovely words, they all paid off. I have 3 regrets. Tookers Road. Nobody's heard more words mentioned in this year, last year than Tookers Road. There's not been a finalisation on that. And families are suffering excessive dust. I won't harbour that. Doonside Bridge. I was told the money was there and it's disappeared. Whether it was or whether it wasn't, I don't know. All I know, it's a priority that we need to find the money somewhere during the next budget. And a matter dear to my heart. I've raised this on a number of occasions and I haven't given up, guys. This shire will be 117 years old on the 8th of August. And I do believe we need to have a celebration. I believe there are ways that can be done. A number of suggestions have been put to me. We need to send a clear message to our brothers in the other local authority. All of our land is valued. We've been here 117 years and we have survived many, many obstacles. I've been through quite a lot of them. They were quite traumatic. They made me like this. But we're still here. And we've got caretakers now who will recognise the worth of the shire and the people in it. I would hope we'd find some way of celebrating, Mr. Mayor, whether it be a cake or whether it be something a little bit more deserving. I'm sure we can come up with it. So I hope my 3 regrets will be finalised before this year is out, Mr. Mayor, and certainly one sooner rather than later. So I'm just saying that we need to be very mindful that we have one threat over us, and that's the loss of our western suburbs. It's a very real threat. And I want you to be very mindful of that. And I wasn't fooling when I said the wheelie walks are out there ready to go the streets. That's how much they value their shire and the people in it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Any other comments, councillors? Okay, well, we'll go. Right.
That's everybody, mate.
Don't be shy, councillors. There's no turns here. So,
Well, I'm happy.
Councillor Hutton, thank you.
Councillors, the 2021 budget papers clearly show that the long-term budget sustainability, which really began a couple of years ago, is having positive results. And we have, for the most part, throughout each of these years, stayed the course. This is in no small part due to the continued diligence of the executive leadership team, every member of our organisation, and the work of both the present and the previous council. Our community expects predictability in the rates that they pay, and they desire prudent financial management, and that's what they're receiving. This budget will deliver Livingston's 5th operating surplus in 6 years. Our strength as an organisation has been our capacity to generate extraordinary revenue beyond our rates, which have delivered outcomes for our community. And in this budget, in the 2021 budget, we thank both the Queensland and the Australian governments for their support of job-creating and job-sustaining projects across our shire. On the back of previous council terms, this budget continues to produce forecast surplus budgets into the future. It continues to pay down debt as we have, and achieves the aspiration of limiting residential rate rises in line with the Consumer Price Index. These were the messages that we've all heard from the community, and with the foundations set, these commitments once again are achieved in the 2021 financial year and into the future. 2 years ago, I spoke of the need for councillors to stay the path of budget repair and consolidation as the vital work which had been undertaken to reflect the changing phase of our shire from growth to consolidation wasn't something that could be achieved in 12 months, but over a 10-year period. And while we see in our capital program this year some fantastic stimulus which has come on the back of COVID and the support of the state and federal government, we actually see in the bones of what our organisations produce, what collectively we've worked through in our capital program, what the officers have brought up and brought down as we've gone through with asset management plans, etc., a prudent investment of our ratepayers' funds across the forward 10-year program. So while there's a little bit of sugar to be had this year because of COVID and stimulus response, our investment and our work across the 10 years is prudent, and it's guaranteeing that we're actually making really sound decisions on behalf of our community. To this plan and to our forecast prosperity, there still lays some risks, and Councillor Maver previously referenced about the land acquisitions at Shoalwater Bay and ADF, which continues to represent a growing financial loss to our community of upwards of $1 million each and every year. But it's also the ever-present impact of the past 3 years where council has made decisions from time to time to give an act of charity, to give an act of kindness where we've relieved or forgiven or deferred or removed payments that were due to council. And over that past 3 periods, it's actually equated to $800,000. Our diligence as councillors, not just here on budget day in these 14 meetings that we've had, but throughout the next 12 months is paramount. We must stay the course, and we must allow for future budgets and for future councils to have the capacity to chase potential dreams by being responsible, prudent financial managers. Ultimately, this budget is a collaboration of the discussions, the debates, the deliberations and the decisions that our group has made as a collective over the past months, and for that I thank each and every one of you. I also thank the ELT for their humour, for their contributions, and respecting that, sometimes at 4:30 in the afternoon when councillors went, we know that we're going to have to leave this over because we want to be able to take it with fresh eyes and have some more time. There was never a weary look on the face. They said, excellent councillors, we understand where you're coming from. So really, really appreciate that. But also the engagement of the community through this process. I am excited about where we take our budgeting and the engagement we're making with the community. We all know that from time to time we'll hear directly, individually, from community members that say that this is my priority or I want to see that done. We also hear from officers where projects go into the capital program because community members have raised them directly through customer service requests. The work that we're doing around budget engagements, not to replace any of that, but it's a reflection of the Livingston 2050 document that says that our community doesn't want to be engaged with once a year or once every 10 years or once every 50 years. It says that our community wants to be involved every step of the way. And so the work that's being done in this space and the work that we'll continue to do in this space, as I said quite cheekily, but really not so much, when we start in August on the next coming budget, is about continuing to grow that. And so I commend the budget to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Councillor Friend?
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. I'd first like to thank Madam CFO. You've done an extraordinary job. And as Councillor Lynch said, you helped us right throughout the whole process. As a new councillor, newly elected councillor in my first budget, responsibility. The responsibility of bringing this budget together weighs very heavily upon my shoulders, as it does all of my colleagues, I'm sure. And the heaviness upon our shoulders with this responsibility is because we care for you, the community. We care about what your needs, what your desires are. That's why you elected us. And so moving forward, I'm very excited about what our new council is achieving. And I so look forward to seeing all of our projects and our capital works completed. And I just want the community to know that we are looking after your future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Councillor Bello.
Yep. I would like to wrap up. The Mayor started today by acknowledging our traditional owners on the land that we meet and honouring them as custodians of the lands around the Livingstone Shire. And I guess I'd like to finish by recognising that us as councillors are custodians ultimately. And it's not that we replace the Strumble people, the traditional owners, but we actually partner with them as present day leaders of our communities. That is the role that we have here. And today we finalise a budget that has been collected by the many ratepayers across our shire in the endeavour to provide the services that our community needs and sometimes perhaps expects, to ensure that the livability of Livingston continues to get better and better and better. And that's something that, as custodians, we get to make a difference in the short time that we're here. And it may be one budget out of 4 that we will do, God willing, and then we'll move on. And there'll be other councillors here, perhaps, that will make their difference and try and be good custodians on behalf of the community. And that is a wonderful privilege that we all have individually and together. And this has been a process of togetherness, of every single councillor, of every single staff member led by our CEO, Andrea there. And I thank everybody who's been thanked and anyone who hasn't been thanked. I think John Milroy is about the only one who hasn't, so I thank John Milroy for turning up from the gallery, being in person, and to all of the members that are watching online. We do this for you in our endeavours to make things better. And I'm reminded of all the plans that we have in council, which I've written down. I was going to try and say so eloquently, with our operational plan and our corporate plan and every other plan that there must be out there. And that's the budget is there to try and, I guess, provide the momentum for those plans. But the plan really that drives me, and I believe each councillor here, is the plan to get out of bed and do things better. That's our plan. You know, we have a plan to make our communities better. And ultimately, whether it be big belly bins on Keppel Island, whether it be $300,000 at the Keppel Sands Caravan Park, whether it be a critical footpath at the caves there, which one of our last community reach, we managed to get to just before dark to be able to see where that footpath was going to go, and for that community it was going to mean a huge amount. And so we endeavour to go to all of those little parts of our community and provide something better as our role as custodians in the present here today. So I commend this budget to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. And would anyone else like to speak to the budget? We've been around the table, I think, haven't we? Okay. All right, councillors. Pardon me. I'll just sum up then. Members of the council, our community, and the gallery present, and our wonderful executive team. Look, this budget basically sets a platform for going forward, but obviously there's a number of components in it that council would like to see improved, and the rate situation notwithstanding, that's probably at the top of the list. But the best way to get our rates down is to grow our shire, to grow our rates base. And in order to do that, we need to be in a position to encourage investment in this shire. I believe that part of this budget is about that. It is about making sure we provide a platform for investment coming forward into this shire. And that's through our Community 2050 plan, through our livable Livingston, our natural Livingston, etc. So Livingston, and to put a very tacky terminology to it, we're open for business, and we need to, I suppose, all recognise that in order to, as I said, reduce the level of rates in this shire, we need to grow our rates base. And so I think this particular budget sets a platform for us to do that going forward. So thank you, councillors, for all of your efforts, and again, thank you to our community for its involvement. Thank you to our staff. And on that basis, councillors, we have a mover and a seconder, and we'll go to the vote for adoption of the budget. So all in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. And given that that's the last item on the agenda for the meeting, we'll officially close the special meeting to adopt the budget in 2020. Thank you very much.